So let's see. And I'm going to just do a check to make sure that when the slideshow starts, you can actually see it. Can you see the 31st slide?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'll spend about an hour or so on some of the key principles that I've learned about, and worked with clients to learn even more after the book came out. And then we'll have Q&A, so 15 minutes or so. I hope you can stay for that, because that's always the most fun for us, me, you. You learn better when you ask good questions and we have discussions. So looking forward to that. All right, so Clarity First was a book that was an offshoot of The Outstanding Organization, which was my first hardcover, big book, big publisher, McGraw-Hill, all that fun stuff. And in that book, I talked about these 4 conditions or behaviors that organizations that have really high performance, top performance organizations tend to have. And it's clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement. Someone needs to mute.
Muchas gracias por confiar en Lucy y los esperamos en la siguiente.
Hey, Alan, do you think you can mention someone needs to mute? Or maybe you can automatically mute everyone. I don't know if you can do that. Anyway, so clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement are the four foundations I found that all organizations that have top performance have in common. And it's not just organizations, it's also sports teams, the military, any kind of team that does really well, and any individual that does really well. And what was weird about that book was I thought that people were going to really zoom in on the discipline and engagement parts of them, but clarity and focus got much more press, many more emails from people, more emotion from people, including this engineer that I had actually worked with at a client, sent me this very emotional email about how when he was reading the first chapter of these 4 in The Outstanding Organization, he actually cried. And he said it was because he knew that he was so frustrated at work, and he knew that there was something really wrong with the culture or the way they were going about it, but he could never put his finger on it. And then he finally realized it was the lack of clarity and the lack of people being willing to operate with clarity. And so he was just, very relieved to have a label to put on it, but also he realized that he had to leave that organization, and he did shortly after, because it just wasn't a cup of tea for him. And so, when you see it all over the place. And at the end of this talk, hopefully you'll be very tuned into this, and you'll start seeing it, maybe even this evening when you talk with your families, or maybe tomorrow when you return to work, or on Zoom calls. So this is an example of the lack of clarity that exists in the world. And this includes, we're going to talk a little bit about quality, because I do quite a bit of work in quality, and also processes. They need to be crisp and easy to understand, and of course, also be designed to not produce errors. So this was a situation where I moved back to Santa Monica after I'd been away in California, and I went around and around and around looking for a parking place, and I finally saw this parking place, and I pulled in, and I said, oh shoot, there's a sign. Well, maybe I can still park here. Can I park here? And I started reading through the sign, and it took a lot of work for me to figure out if I could park there. And so when you think about being in the presence of the lack of clarity, it usually, a sign is that you're having to do a lot of mental work, and it just doesn't feel right. You can start tapping into how you're actually feeling about an email, feeling about a conversation, feeling about direction that's been given, and the quality of the direction, including whether or not it's clear. You'll start tapping into just how common of a problem this is. But I also want to be clear, no pun intended, that certainty and clarity are not the same thing. So a lot of people get confused, and they say, well, you can't be certain. It's like, yeah, I agree. You can't be certain about much. I think they say one certainty is death and taxes. And so, certainty is not really easy to achieve, because anything can come in from left field that is a surprise, like COVID, like 9/11, like the 2008 meltdown, like the tsunami that knocked out supply chains all over the place. So certainty is tough to achieve, but clarity is when you can take the known and you can make it clear and not be in the presence of its opposite, which is ambiguity. The problem with ambiguity, let me tell you one quick thing about, and then I'll go with the problem about ambiguity. So clarity has these three characteristics. The information is coherent, it's precise, and it's elegant. So coherence, it makes sense. It has stickiness, everything's hanging together. You're not going like, huh? You know, it's coherent. Precision, it's exact. So it means you're saying what you mean what you say, you're writing what you say. The standard work is written in a way that's precise about what someone should do. The quality standards are written in a way that everyone knows exactly what to do, etc. And elegance is the ease, you know, the ease of getting this information. And by the way, we will send you a copy of the handout with these slides on it at the end of the session. So those are the three characteristics: coherence, precision, and elegance. Ambiguity is a big problem, the opposite of clarity, because it complicates everything. It slows things down. It's very frustrating to be in the presence of ambiguity. It introduces tremendous risk, especially in the quality arena. Ambiguity and lack of precision and clear information is a death sentence in the quality area. And it's very expensive. It's expensive in terms of the outcomes that can occur as a result of ambiguity. It's also expensive just from a pure labor cost perspective, because people taking any extra time to like figure things out, scratching their head, they have to figure things out that should have been or could have been clear to begin with, is a waste of resources. And it also tends to be very frustrating for people because they want to do good work that makes their mind they want to use their mind in a way that's, you know, the best work their mind can do, not try to figure out what someone means in an email. You know, that's not a very good use of our time. So ambiguity is no bueno. So take a quick glance at this on your monitors and say, how many dots do you see? And you can put them in the chat. Maybe someone can look at the chat for me and tell me, because I can't see chat right now, how many dots people are saying. Don't go slowly and count. It's at a glance. How many dots do you see? I don't know if anyone's looking at the chat, so maybe I'll just move on then. Okay, I see 12. Okay, good. So there are 12. Most people do not see 12 at once. It depends on the size monitor you have and where you are, you know, in reference to that monitor. But what happens is that lattice work hides what's really going on. So there's all this noise, and it's difficult to see the dots. It took you some work. It's those of you that got 12, it took a lot of work to see 12, whereas here, bam, you see 12. And so that's an analogy that you should think about when you go back into business and, you know, in your offices and that type of thing. Now, in terms of what you need to get clarity, you can't just go, all right, let's get clarity. There's a little more to the story. And this is what I learned as I was studying it. And it's a very complex topic, by the way, to study. It was very interesting how little agreement there was on some of the basics, and then how little research had been done on it in general. But humility and curiosity are two of the aspects of how we behave and how we think that make clarity either present or not present. So let's take them one at a time. So humility, we really have to be able to understand when we don't know and admit when we don't know and be okay with that. It's actually very empowering to be able to say, like, I don't know, please help me understand, or I don't know, but I'm going to go find out. You know, being very clear that you don't know should be a very risk-free position to take. Curiosity is the trickier one of it, believe it or not. And that's because when we were kids, when we were little kids, we were all born, no matter where you were born, no matter what conditions you were born into, you're born a curious being. Little kids are very, very curious. What's the single most frequent question a kid asks? Why? Second most frequent, why not? You know, and so why, we're all born with this natural curiosity. But what happens is over time, it gets tamped down and drummed out of us. It can happen from well-meaning parents that maybe they're very rushed at home because they're working each one's working a job and they're juggling the kids, and the kids ask these why questions, and it's like, oh, I don't have time for that. And I was one of those kids that heard that a little bit from my parents, not a lot, but a little bit from my parents. Teachers, Teachers have over large classrooms. They're trying to juggle all these students, and every student that wants to know why, which is the natural curiosity, a teacher can get very frustrated very quickly. They shouldn't, but that's because classrooms are too big and the environment doesn't really allow for those thoughtful answers and things like that. And bosses, when you get into the workforce, bosses, and I had a big dose of this when I was in my very first corporate career. My boss, Roberta, during my first review, after I'd been there for a year, said to me, okay, here's all the good things. And she went through all the good traits. And then she said, but there's just something that I really want to talk with you about. And I said, what is that? She goes, you have a really high need to know. And I just kind of sat there for a minute because I was trying to figure out, like, she hadn't done a clear transition to the negatives, but it was very clear that that was a negative in her mind. And then I started feeling like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be asking any questions, because she gave me some examples and it did affect me. I stopped asking clarifying questions because it was, I was kind of punished for it. I didn't get, I got a good raise. It wasn't like I didn't get a good raise, but it still felt like it was very judgmental and that it was not okay to ask questions. So that's one example of one person who affected me, and it took me years to undo that and get that tape to get out of my head that played. So you have these adults that used to be kids that had all these different, situations in their lives that may have gotten them not feeling safe to be curious. And curiosity is what really drives clarity. So it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all to be, trying to seek the truth and trying to seek clarity and not be able to because people don't want you to. Another thing that didn't help us are these social messages that we get that are just kind of out there, and you forget how much this stuff influences us. So what does this cartoon represent? What phrase is it? Curiosity killed the cat. So that doesn't sound very good. Curiosity's been given a bad rap for a long time. The next thing, Curious George. What happened with Curious George? When he got curious, he got himself in trouble, had to be rescued with the man in the yellow hat. So that doesn't sound good either. And I could go on. There's lots and lots of examples of this. So we really have to look at the pairing of these two. Having humility and curiosity together is what makes someone more apt to behave with clarity, to communicate with clarity, and to seek clarity. So it goes both ways. There's you delivering, writing emails, having a presentation, giving a direction to someone, and there's you seeking clarity when the message is not clear. So I want to be really clear, no pun intended again. I'm not suggesting that you don't seek clarification. I suggest that you create an environment and processes that don't require people to seek clarification. Big difference there. So back to humility. One of the things that happens, especially in problem solving, I do a lot of work in scientific problem solving, and what happens a lot is that people operate from this kind of primal place of arrogance. In a way, it is a form of arrogance to just think you know something. So when people are leaping to solutions, leaping to conclusions, operating even with a bias is a bit of a form of arrogance. It's really takes a lot of thinking and behaving and frankly coaching to really break the habit of thinking you know something when you don't. And so data-driven decision making, which I'm sure many of you love, data-driven decision making does require us to operate with a tremendous sense of humility that we're not sure, we need to go get the data to find out. And so that's hopefully this is going to be very comforting for you guys because you're kind of hardwired for this to begin with. But everybody that's hardwired still has a journey to take. I was hardwired as a scientist as well, and I actually was a scientist, and I had a journey to take to discover how little I was operating with clarity in some circumstances. So another thing that we've got going against us, we've got now 180 different identified cognitive biases, which is, a mental framework of how we think. We believe that this is the truth because blah, blah, blah. We believe this is the truth because blah, blah, blah. And there's all these different cognitive biases, which biases in and of themselves are actually a little helpful. They can help put, some structure around a lot of conflicting information and make sense of it. But you have to recognize when you're operating with one. And that's the thing that is harder to do, not impossible, but harder to catch yourself in the moment operating with a bias. Like, I think that this team needs to do this because they always blah, blah, blah. And that's a bias. It's just based on history, but it doesn't mean they are going to do it again. It just means that there's a propensity, not always. So things like that. And then the other thing would be in jumping to conclusions is, what do you think this phrase says? Jumping to conclusions, right? Nope, it does not. So again, we have this imprinting that happens from history that looks like the sentence jumping to conclusion. Therefore, it must be the sentence jumping to conclusions, but it's not. And so this is what we do, a lot of helping people with problem solving, and you should start, doing when you're working with teams, because probably a lot of you do a lot of problem solving coaching and that type of thing, is getting people really sensitized to understanding how their brain is working. We call that metacognition, M-E-T-A. Metacognition is thinking about how you think and becoming aware of how you think. It's really important. The other big thing against us is running against us to make it more likely that we don't seek or deliver with clarity is time. When we're rushed, we tend to not operate with great degrees of clarity. We tend to not seek as much clarity. So we tend to have a little more of that ambiguous fog running around us everywhere. And so we have to, clarification takes time, but it's worth the investment. It's the overall cycle to get work done and get it done well is greatly shortened by operating with clear information to begin with and delivering clear information. The last thing, and probably the most insidious and difficult one to really put your finger on and do something about, is fear. So fear is present in many organizations, and even in organizations that don't have an overarching theme of fear, have fear pockets within the organizations where a boss is a little too sometimes mean, sometimes disrespectful, and it makes it so people are sometimes terrified to seek clarity because they're going to get beaten down. Terrified. I mean, I've met with frontline people and up the ranks and managers, even directors, that are like, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to get punished. And so, Deming said it the best, banish fear from the workplace. We certainly can't always, get rid of all of it, but we can do a much better job at heightening leaders' awareness to how they're generating fear, if they are, and other factors that bring fear into the workplace that doesn't serve anyone well at all. So what I learned was that there were 3 primary clarity types. There are lots and lots of nuances and shades of all these different things. And as I go through each one of them, know that no one is just a pure type. It's kind of like, well, I don't know if any of you are into astrology, probably not too many of you, but there's not a pure type. And that's true of personalities, the Myers-Briggs, like no one is a pure ENTJ all the time or something like that. So here's the 3. A clarity pursuer is someone who's consistently pursuing the information, both as a provider and a recipient. So just they're kind of like a dog going after a bone. I need clarity in order to start this project. I need clarity about what the expectations are. I need clarity about what the action is that someone is asking me to take. I need clarity about what role I have in the decision-making process. All of those types of things. The opposite end of it is a clarity avoider, and there's 3 subtypes of a clarity avoider. One is intentional deceit, and that's your classic sociopath. That's a liar. It's someone who is, very, very intentionally shrouding the truth and those types of things. Then strategic ambiguity is a little less psychologically pathology oriented. Strategic ambiguity is sometimes valid in business, not often, but sometimes you don't want to necessarily tell the truth right away until there's better messaging available or there's a backup plan or whatever. So for example, if a company is about to go into a merger situation with another company, you don't want to blast that right away because you can ruin the whole thing. Same with, if a company's going to spin off a unit, you don't necessarily want to, say that right away until you've gotten all the actions in place on what's going to happen with those people that are in the spun off unit and things like that. It happens all over companies, but there are times when it's called for. They're just not very common. And then there's type 3, which is a really dangerous kind of willful ignorance. And I call this the la, 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 la. Like you just don't want to know the truth. And when you've been in a situation where you've been hurt, it's very, very common to kind of like not want to know the truth because you don't want to be hurt again. And that can be personal hurt, that can be business hurt. And so there's that. So you have to kind of like keep your radar tuned for any propensity to go into that willful ignorance place. You know, I've always said as a kid all the way to my years now, I'd rather know the truth no matter how bad it is than to not know the truth, because then I know what I'm dealing with. When you don't know the truth, you don't know what you're dealing with. And so there's just this, like, how can you be effective when you don't know what the facts are and what's going on? The last one is clarity blind, and this is the one that the book was kind of written for. It's clarity blind are people that in some circumstances, maybe all circumstances, simply don't see that clarity is even a thing. And since I wrote this book, I've had so many people like yell at me, kidding yelling at me like, oh, damn you, Karen Martin, excuse my French, like, oh, Karen Martin, like I can't stop thinking about clarity now. It's like in my head, like I have succeeded. You know, so there's recognizing it's a thing to begin with and something to really try to make improvement around. And also that some people are just, they're aware, but then they have a hard time perceiving it. So one of the things that I always recommend is that everyone can get better and better and better and better. It's infinity at quieting the mind and being present. Like when you can just quiet your mind and be present with another person, present in a group, present with an email even, present doing anything, you will get so much more information about the situation than when you're kind of scattered, you're rushing and you're multitasking, which you can't really do, 2 cognitive tasks at the same time. So you're actually switching back and forth. And the more you behave that way and allow that kind of chaos into your life, the harder it is to really see what you're thinking, listen to how you're speaking, pay attention to the body language of the person that you're speaking with. You know, there's all those things that you really need to pay good attention to be working with a lot of clarity. So how did I approach the book? Well, with all that as a foundation, it was not easy. I decided finally to break it into these 5 key areas. I'm going to give you just a taste of each of them. The book goes into far more detail and why they're important, and why I picked these particular 5 to focus on. So the first one is purpose. And this is the thing that I find organizations pretty lousy at unless it's a social service organization. Healthcare also tends to be a little better at this in knowing like what's the true purpose of the business. And it's not to make money, for sure. That's not the reason why any founder, well, that's not true. It's not why most founders founded companies. Most founders founded companies because they had a product idea or a service idea that served a need, solved a problem, and that's why they did it. And they were hoping they would make a dime doing that. And so that's usually how a company forms. Now it can get bastardized and morphed into some shadow of its former self because of being publicly traded and having shareholder pressure, and being PE owned sometimes is not a pleasant thing. VC backed, sometimes not a pleasant thing. You know, so all those pressures can make it harder to stick true to that purpose. But the purpose isn't what you do, it's why you do it. So why do you deliver that product over another product? Why do you deliver that service over a different service? Why? What are you trying to solve? What problem are you trying to solve? So why matters not as much to external customers, although some customers are very purpose driven, and knowing a company's purpose draws them to that company and makes more loyal customers. But it's really the employees of the organization. And everybody wants to be almost everyone wants to be a part of something larger than themselves. So knowing the purpose of an organization and having the values alignment with that purpose is very helpful for attracting top talent to a company and retaining them when you get them there. It's very, very important to use that why to bring people in and keep them there. So when you're thinking about purpose, it's not just the purpose of the company. It's thinking about everything you do and everything you're involved in. What's the purpose of this? Meeting management 101 is not very common. What's the purpose of this meeting? What are we trying to do here? What are we going to achieve by the end of the meeting? We will be able to do what? You're going to make a decision, you're going to take an action. What is the purpose of the meeting, the project, the email? What's the purpose of your role? A lot of times role clarification is called for immediately when we walk into an organization, because people are stepping all over each other and they don't really understand where their boundaries are and where their work stops and another person's work starts, and why is that, and all those things. Like, we see a lot of opportunity in the role clarification arena. What's the purpose of the department? What's the purpose of the company? This is an all-state slide. Like, what's the purpose of your company, your product, etc. So that's what you need to be thinking about all the time. So to think about if you want to mine for your organization's purpose, you need to think about, first, what do you do? That's the easy one to answer. And then what you really do is what problem it solves for a customer. That one is not as easy to answer, but it's easy-ish to answer. Why do you do it? What's the sole purpose, or the ultimate purpose, is the one that's harder to answer. So Toyota has done a great job with, our purpose is to build cars by building people. And their other purpose is to, get people safely from point A to point B, safely from point A to point B, and transport people. So that's an example. So priorities is the second P, and this is the one that's one of my favorite ones, because most organizations have so many priorities that they can't get anything done. And so what we're going to do now is, if you want to get your phones ready and get your stopwatch up on it, I don't know how many of you have an iPhone versus, I don't know the Androids, but on the iPhone, you have a little, like a clock. If you swipe down, you have a little clock, and then there's a stopwatch at the bottom. So I want you to get that ready. And because we're going to do a timed activity here in just a minute. So there are so many great ideas. There are lots and lots of great ideas, but there are a limitation to the number of minutes in a day, days in a week, weeks in a year, years, in an era, etc. So we have to really focus on the relevant few at that moment and get those done, and then move on to the next relevant few, and then the next relevant few, instead of trying to juggle everything. Because when you juggle, you're engaged in something called task switching. And for those of you who may not have heard of this professor at University of Michigan, David Meyer, was the first one to do this research, and he researched it with engineers. And he studied, what he found with most engineers that he studied was they switched the task or the project they were working on about 5 to 8 times a day. And each time they did that switch, it took them an average of 20 minutes to be able to get any really constructive work done, because they had to mentally switch from one to the other. Yeah, I'm sure you're already starting to think about this, and about how hard it is when you get interrupted. So when you multiply that 20-minute mental shift, mental setup, like those of you who do any equipment setup and changeover reduction, this is our mind's version of that. Multiply it out times the number of people that are doing that, times the number of times per day they're doing that, and you see a boatload of wasted time that could be otherwise put to really good use. So it's a really big deal. It's a big disease in a lot of organizations. And so one of the, say what you want about Steve Jobs, he wasn't a perfect leader by any means. None of them are, and none of us are. But one of the keys to Apple's success is his laser focus. He was able to say no to the 1,000 things to make sure that they don't get on the wrong track or try too much. And so it's by saying no, or my favorite version of that isn't no, it's not yet or not now. And wait until there's an appropriate time where you have the bandwidth to do the work and do it well. That's what's really important. So cognitive tasks, the way to test this, so that you don't say, oh, Karen Martin, you don't know what you're talking about. I do know what I'm talking about on this one. So here's how you're going to test it. You're going to go to a TV after this session and find a channel that has a ticker tape along the bottom. It could be a sports channel, financials channel, news channel, and listen to the commentator or the anchor you have to really listen to take in what they're actually saying and retain it, and read the ticker tape at the same time. No can do. You can't absorb those, so you can't do 2 cognitive tasks at one time. You can eat while you're watching TV. That's a non-cognitive and a cognitive task, etc. But you can't do 2 things at once. So when we ask in job postings for people to be good at multitasking, it's silliness because it doesn't exist, and you don't want people who think that it does exist and think that that's the way to exist. You want people who don't like multitasking because it's a big time suck. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 tasks. We're going to do 2 rounds of a timed exercise. This is super fast. And what you're going to do is you're going to have 2 tasks that you need to complete. So the first task is writing the sentence, focus reduces to chaos. Don't do it yet. Focus reduces chaos. You need to get a piece of paper and pen, by the way. I know no one has pens anymore. Get a piece of paper and pencil or pen or something nearby. That's the first task. The second task is writing the numbers in sequence 1 through 17, which happens to correspond with the number of letters in focus reduces chaos. Now, there's a little more to the story. So what you're going to do is just draw 2 lines on a piece of paper. And for the first round, we're going to time the time it takes you to complete both tasks. But you're going to do it by task switching back and forth. So when I say ready, set, go, you'll start your stopwatch, and then you'll do F on the top line, 1 on the bottom line, O on the top line, 2 on the bottom line, C on the 3 on the top line, 3 on the bottom line. You're going to go back and forth and stop your stopwatch when you get to 17. Okay? Everyone got it? So back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So on your mark, get set, go. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop. So could you put in chat what your times were for completing both tasks? Okay, so see a 34, 33 and a half, 35, 40, 40, 42, 36. Okay, so you're all like kind of in that 35 to 40 range, it seems, pretty much. So now what we're going to do is we're going to not do this task switching thing. We're going to do fewer things at once. We're going to do first just the sentence and then the numbers 1 through 17. So you're not going to do any task switching. So does that make sense? So first you're going to write the full sentence, then the numbers 1 through 17. You're going to reset your stopwatch so it's at 0. And then when you get to 17, you'll stop it again, and we'll see what happens. And pay attention to how it feels. Okay? On your mark, get set, go. All right, I'm gonna stop. How many seconds? 20, 18, 15, not counting. 15, not counting quality. 20, 20, 24, 19, 17. Yeah. So quite a bit of savings. And how did it feel? Did it feel any different than the first round? Easier, easier. Yeah. Superb. Yay. Good. Yes, 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 yes. Easier. Good. And, so this may seem like a simple little, silly little example, but this is a microcosm of what you can do in an organization. And let's just talk about project management for a minute. So project management classically is, you get this team together and you get together once a week or so, and you go through this like months and months and months and months and months, sometimes years and years and years projects. And then you have like a lot of those. And so every time you go to those meetings, you have to kind of get your mind back on, where do we leave off? Why do we decide that? Why did they say that? And it takes a lot of time. So it's, we are in a society that seems to kind of honor, do it all, juggle. But I'm asking you to just say no to that and stop juggling. You deserve it. Your companies deserve it. You deserve sanity. And you will triple your output by doing this. So that is the promise. If you stop doing so many things at once, you will triple what you can do, pretty much. So here's an example of a real client. Before, this is a product development example. And so this is 24 products launched in the year prior to starting to operate with focus. And this is clarity about mission and clarity about what they needed to accomplish that helped them achieve the focus. And with the exact same resources, no change to the complexity of the work. They reported much, much more joyful work, less stress, higher quality. And that's what we're all about, is getting that type of work environment in place. And customers deserve it too. It's not just internal people. It's customers deserve to have products that are higher quality and can get to them faster. And you do that by doing fewer things at once. So the two laws are stop doing and do fewer things at once. So stop doing is just do an inventory of what you're doing in your personal lives, at work, and just make the decision to stop doing some of it. And I challenge clients all the time. I say, you run it. Why are you running that report? Who's that report go to? Like, oh, it goes to all these people. I go, what do they do with it? I really don't know, but it's a process. I'm like, what if you stop doing it? Like, just stop running the report. See what and 90% of the time, it takes weeks and weeks and months for anyone to say anything at all, if anyone says anything at all. And so, it's just thinking about how wisely we need to spend our time. When we do prioritization, whether it's at a team level, department level, division level, company level, there's this inventory of work that I would recommend that you take a look at. And then by looking at that inventory of work, you categorize things first into the must-do area. It's easier to get people to agree on that. Then, no, we don't need to do that. The need for that has gone away. And you do that. And then we have the not yet. We can wait until next fiscal year, or we can wait till next month or whatever. Like, we just don't have to do everything right now. And then you have a bunch of maybes that you don't know where they're going to go. And then you just position those to those three categories and get consensus on it. And you've got yourself a good priority list. Works really well. Process. So process is important, and it's lacking in many organizations. What happens when you walk into an organization is, you get hired, and then you go to onboarding, and that's usually HR policies, and it's the transactional part of the hiring experience. Then you get into the job area that you're going to have, and it's like, how do you get trained? Most people do not get trained using really clear standard work. They get trained by someone telling them, and they have to retain all of this information in their heads and talk about a risk to quality problems when you have to retain stuff in your head and you don't have an official document. And I will say, for those of you who haven't ever seen the lean management version of standard work, this is work instructions. It's only one type of standard work. And one of the differentiators from the policies and procedures, SOPs, whatever you want to call them, from the days gone by, is that they're highly visual. And so, I was a victim of these big 3-ring binders of SOPs that when I took a new job, they stuck me in a room and made me read that. I mean, what a ridiculously disrespectful way to have someone start a new job. To stick them in a room with a big 3-ring binder. People need to be doing the work, using these types of tools. Checklists are another type of standard work as a job aid. Decision trees, another type of standard work. Like, all of these things need to be documented. And just a note on decisions. leaders need to get clearer, a lot clearer on how they make decisions to get more consistency among the leadership team on how they make decisions. And I'm working with a leadership team right now. We're like, wait, it's situational. And I said, no, it's not as situational as you think it is. Yes, there are nuances, but you can actually codify nuances. And you can say that in this condition, we make this decision for these reasons. But in this condition, we make this decision for these reasons. You can have all kinds of tables and decision trees that really help not just process work, but how people are making decisions. It's fascinating and very rewarding work to do. All right, so now making problems visible is, of course, the heart and soul of visual management and creating a visual workplace. And so this is the key to quality, is making problems visible before the problem occurs, or at least detectable the moment it does occur. And it's not as easy in the knowledge work arena as it is in a physical plant of some sort, any kind of physical manufacturing, field production, landscaping, nothing on is as easy when you were trying to make work visible as it is when it's physical. But a lot of IT work and stuff like that can make things far more visible than they are right now. So don't discount that. And then I want to talk just a real quick thing about inspection. I love talking with quality teams about inspection. So there are a lot of third-party inspections in organizations before product goes out the door. And some of that is warranted in the short term until processes become a little more error-proofed. But what I would love to think about is getting clarity of process and clarity of decision-making to the point where you don't need as much third-party inspection, meaning another person or another team comes in, and you work to get the clarity in the work so that the person also has time to do self-inspection, really good self-inspection. And they have a clear list of criteria for when they can pass that work on. That's missing in so many organizations. Like, under what conditions can I pass this to the next person in the chain? Just getting clarity on that can do a whole lot to get the downstream quality far, far higher, and not as much rework, not as much waste, and all those things that quality problems make us experience. And value stream maps, for those of you that are familiar with value stream mapping, this is just a beautiful way to be able to see some of the invisible processes that we've got. Like, this is a case where each of these little rectangles up here is a separate application or IT system, color-coded so you can see who's entering into and drawing information from each of the systems. And the level of clarity that this gives you is pretty profound, to the point where, in this case, at this client, the CIO, or it might have been CTO, walked in. We had a briefing at the end of day 2 of mapping. The team complained terribly about how much they have been trying to get budget. You see, none of these systems connect except for the last two. The AutoCAD is connected here. None of them connect. And you can see multiple touch points. Like, this block has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're entering into 5 different systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, this was like classic and just a very compelling example. CTO took one look at this and said, you got budget. I'll make it happen tomorrow to get these systems, think about how we integrate, think about how we reduce the amount of data entry we have to do manually, think about how we automate data, and it was transformative. So value stream mapping can be very, very helpful from a visualization perspective, clarity. At a process level, metrics-based process mapping, where there are swim lanes. We're metrics-based, heavy metrics with all of our mapping, because that's how you can really see where the waste is. And so that's another technique that you can use. And on to performance. So once you've got good processes in place that are very clear and they're visual, then you have to start seeing, like, how are we performing? So here's what we see in most organizations. No scoreboard, or a scoreboard that has nothing on it. So it's like, how do people know? Think about this. How do people possibly know if they're doing well, if they're not doing well, if they're headed in the right direction? What does good look like? how are they doing? This information makes it very difficult to be successful and very difficult to really even give a hoot about work. When you do, like, think about going to a football team, if there's no scoreboard, like, you're not going to clap. Like, who are you clapping for? You don't know what's going on. So scoreboards are really important, and it's really important to be very selective in what is on those scoreboards. So you notice that football games, soccer games, basketball games, baseball games, any sport, they're collecting all kinds of stats, but the scoreboard doesn't have them all on there. It's just the relevant stats that people need in order to understand what's going on and whether it's headed in the right direction. That's all you need at a high level. So 2 to 8 at the very most would be, our recommendation. So this is an example of a high level board. This is a really great story in clarity seeking. This was a company that was privately held. They had no reason to have to paste anything on a wall. They weren't held to the publicly traded, standards that people do. And yet these were their exact KPIs. They had on the first floor in the lobby area, right when you walk in the door, the second floor, right after you walk up the stairs to the main common area where the employees gathered for lunches and things like that. And they had it in all the major break rooms, the same exact scorecard. So people were always aware of what was going on at all times. They were bought by a private equity firm, and the scoreboards came down. They had been a top performing company that people were beating down the doors to become an employee of this company. It had the culture that you want everybody to have. It was such an invigorating. I spent a lot of time at this company, not as their consultant, but just being there and studying them and things like that. It was phenomenal. And then the PE company took down the signs. All of a sudden, fear seeped in, and that company became a shadow of its former self. They couldn't get people. They lost tons of people. They couldn't get people to come work there. And thankfully, they have made a change in ownership again, and they are turning back around, and they're heading back toward those days. And so it's a lovely thing to see that you can dig yourself out of a trench. So anyway, this is the level of clarity that helps. And finally, problem solving. So most of you are probably pretty aware of scientific problem solving, given the industry we're all in. But it is very important to use some sort of scientific problem solving that helps clarify the problem, and frankly, it brings joy into problem solving. Like, problem solving shouldn't be drudgery. It could be hard, if there are multiple root causes or there are hidden root causes, and it may take a lot to get to the root cause. But boy, when you get there, sweet, isn't it? When you finally figure out what the root cause is. So we do a lot of work with problem solving. And instead of getting people, instead of people that are, hiding behind fear and things like that, we're looking to, in the problem solving process, get people to go and see it, get out of the conference room, get out of a computer, go and see. Now, a little more challenging during COVID, but hey, we had some pretty innovative going to the Gemba, as it's called. We had a lot of innovative things. That we have a client right now in Lithuania. We're in our second year with them, and we've never been there. And so they send us video and aerial shots and drawings and pictures, and and we interview people. And so we're at the Gimbal as much as you can be behind a Zoom camera. But it's, you just have to do that and not be, stuck in a data set, or, in a room, not knowing what's going on. So it's very, very important. Something I did for clarity first is, so let me go back to this so you're not reading. I have long been a fan of PDCA, PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Adjust, Plan, Do, Check, Act. DMAIC is, of course, the more common one probably in your world. Also scientific problem solving, it's great. There's TBP, which is Toyota Business Practices. There's Ford's 8D, the 8 dimensions, disciplines. Dimensions. There's OODA for some of those that know that. There's all these different scientific problem solving methods. What I feel like, 8 disciplines, thank you. What I got really concerned about early on in doing this work is that these acronyms kind of hid what was really going on. the longer the number of steps are, so DMAIC has one more than PDCA, 8D has 3 more than DMAIC, and the longer the acronym was, the more clear it actually got, but it also makes it less accessible for people. So I tried to figure out a way that would get to the essence of what's really in these. The plan, do, study, adjust, or plan, do, check, act. Plan, that's not at all what it means. You're not really developing a plan at all in doing a scientific approach to PDCA. So I came up with a questions-based model that you can layer onto any of these methods. And it just helps people get clearer on what precisely are they actually doing in that phase. So, clarifying like the define and DMAIC and the plan and PDCA, like there's a lot to clarifying a problem. And it's not just clarifying it for the sake of the problem solver. It's also clarifying it for those that are going to be helping in solving the problem. And so there's like how significant is the problem is really important from a selling perspective, to sell the need to solve the problem in the first place. It's not just solving the problem. And I could go on. So I'm happy to send this also. I forgot to attach this, Alan, to your email, but I'm happy to send this to you as well. So you've got a copy of this. It's, people that use it, and I have tons of DMAIC, 8D people using this kind of as a guide. They are loving it because they finally understand what's behind each of those phases. So now let's talk about you. We've talked about the organization. We've talked about the 5 Ps. And now we're going to talk about people, and you are a peep. So you are part of the people. It's easy for us to kind of look at everybody else and say, like it's not me, it's them type of thing. The way to move mountains is to change within yourself and get better at something yourself. And that stuff becomes really addictive and infectious. It is really interesting how when we work with clients and start introducing them to clarity, and you see little, come up, this person and that person and this person, and eventually you get a critical mass of people that are seeking clarity, operating with clarity, valuing clarity, and it is just stunning what can happen to an organization and how fear can melt away and all those things. Now, I would say that leaders need to want it. They need to have an appetite for it to be the most successful. But you can get little clarity pockets in your work team, your department. I mean, you can get clarity pockets at home, with your friends. You can get these pockets of brilliance wherever you can get them. And it's not all that hard to do once you heighten people's awareness and you start kind of gently reminding people when you see that they're not operating with clarity, or when you need to seek clarity, or suggesting that, oh, okay, that would have been nice to have that in the first place. And one of the ways, remember I talked about centering and emptying your mind and you'll be able to hear more and see more. I do suggest that you introduce a clarity pause many times throughout the day. So a clarity pause can be like literally as simple as you need to call someone and you stop for a minute. What's the purpose of the call? What do I want to achieve? How am I going to approach this so it's more likely to get what I am looking for to achieve? What is this? How is it best to communicate with this person? This person's not the same as that person. So just taking a quick pause, I'm talking seconds, maybe a minute. I'm not talking about pondering for 5 minutes before you make a phone call, although some phone calls do warrant that, and a lot more than 5 minutes for some phone calls. But it's just becoming habituated to taking that pause before you write that email, before you hit the send button, before you walk into a meeting. All those different things can really help you in being able to operate with greater clarity. So one of the things you could do is just take these 3 quick questions and start applying this. I mean, just talking it's lovely to get people aware of it and everything, but I want you to do something with it. So number 1, like what's one thing that you could start doing tomorrow personally to help you operate with greater clarity? Just pick one thing that you are already aware of through listening and thinking about yourself that you could do differently that would be helpful. Number 2, what's this one thing that you when you anticipate when you start behaving this way, what's the one thing that you're going to be incorporating into your workday or in your personal life, and what do you think is going to happen when you do that? Just seeing that, you know, prediction of what you think is going to happen and then reflecting on what does happen. And then the third one is the most important one, if you want to spread it widely, is what's one thing you could do to help the organization operate with greater clarity. It could be something as simple as helping people make sure that they always know what the purpose of a meeting is. It could be clarifying processes. It could be creating or clarifying standards. It could be any number of things. Like, just take some action and help move the needle on from ambiguity to clarity. And last thing I'll say is that you know, a lot of people get a little nervous about clarity because it's, you know, like even things getting clearer about committing to something, then there's responsibility to follow through and things like that. So sometimes people like ambiguity because they don't have to kind of commit, but that's not helpful for them or anyone else. So I do view clarity, even if it's an ugly truth that you uncover, most of the time it's not ugly, and it's not scary. So even if you do, it's liberating. It's liberating to know. It's better to know than to not know, and because then you can do something about it. So liberate, help liberate everybody. We're going to open it up for Q&A in a minute here. I just want to share with you a couple ways you can connect with me if you'd like to. Again, we'll send you the slides so you have this. And then the other thing I wanted to just quickly announce is, I don't know how many of you are aware that we started an online learning academy. Again, this was right after COVID hit. I was sharing that with Alan beforehand. So it was tough times with budgets being cut and everything like that. But we did it. We're here and we're doing really well. So I'd love for you to visit us and see if there's anything that is really interesting to you. We've got lots of courses. We launched a new course about every 6 to 8 weeks. So yesterday or 2 days ago, we launched the continuous improvement culture course, and we're starting to animate now the A3 report course that will launch in 4 to 6 weeks. There's a couple different ways to buy them if you're interested. You can buy them individually, you can get a subscription, you can get these prepaid license packages, and there's all different ways you can get them. So we have a really exciting lineup for this year. So come join us, come learn with us. All right, so that is all I have. I am going to stop sharing now so we can go to Q&A. Thank you for your time. I look forward to good questions and having a good conversation.
Thank you, Ken. Wow, it was great. Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Hopefully there's some helpful tidbits there.
yes,
Thank you,
definitely.
Arnold.
Thank you.
Questions? Oh, turn on your cameras, Maggie says. I agree. Oh, no, no, that was you, Ellen. Turn on your cameras.
And on the cameras.
I love to see people. I know it's late in the day, and you're all, you know, long day, all that stuff, but it's good to see you.
Hello, I had a comment.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have I'm doing this from a phone. I'm out and about. But one thing early in your presentation, you talked about clarity, which was bang on, by the way.
Thank you.
One thing you didn't mention was what I've found in my experience is that the people who write procedures or things intended, you know, the creators of the communication tend to be, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll say smart, but they may not be articulate. And they may think of themselves as being too smart. You know, they spend too much time in front of the mirror. But my point here is that I see the fail coming where people do not write to their intended audience.
Right.
Clarity doesn't matter if you don't understand who you're speaking to, and procedures and anything you're communicating. It doesn't matter if you're talking to PhDs only, then write to a PhD level. If you're writing to machinists, you need to write to machinist level. The point is that it's not communication unless the message received is the one that was sent. And
Correct.
That was the one thing I thought that I didn't hear, but that's critically important. I've seen so many organizations fail because they write, if you're able to understand them, they write brilliant procedures. But if that's not your education level or it doesn't fit your work area or your work center, then people are lost and mistakes happen and people get mad and then they don't pay attention.
Yeah, excellent point, Kevin, and thank you for bringing it up. And I'm sad I didn't say it because it is really important. And what we do when we're working with clients in developing any sort of written documentation about processes, whether it's work instructions, checklists, whatever, there's a an actual process they have to follow. And the first part of it is getting clear on what the mission of the thing is that they're creating. You know, what's the purpose of that? Second is who's the audience and what's the best way to convey the information to that audience. But the audience is actually a testing entity in the early drafts of it and in the later drafts of it. So, you know, and you know, a lot of times this is very new, especially for quality folks that are the ones doing the documentation. It's very new for them to not be the sole author of something as it goes through. But, you know, sometimes we're able to teach the front lines and middle managers, whoever it's intended to help with their work, to do it themselves. Sometimes they really do need the help of a quality person who's used to writing, you know, procedures and things like that. But you have to create the environment where the person can say, I have no idea what that says. I have no idea what that means. That I don't know what that word is. You know, it does, you like, know thy audience is key. So thank you so much for raising that.
Yeah, and I think the other point, and I'll leave you, is that the other thing is that those who have knowledge and leadership or are in leadership positions have a duty to teach. And if you can't communicate and you can't impart knowledge, and if you can't make people feel as though if you can't make them feel as though they've used their time wisely by interacting with you, I think that's a fail.
Yeah, agree. Good points. Thank you. Who else?
Karen, I work in an organization that prides itself on being lean, but in many ways really isn't. I'm trying to think of the best first step I could take organizationally. I wondered if you had any recommendations.
When you say that they pride themselves on being lean, do you mean lean in people or lean management?
Well, a little bit of both, but mostly lean management.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of fake lean out there. So that might be the case in your company. You know, I like to identify a problem, a gap to be closed. So I consider problems gaps to be closed. And I like to identify one that is important, but maybe a little bit easier to close to get people feeling more safe about a particular concept. And so I would pick something that might be a little less threatening than something that might be a little scary for people. Like leadership decision making and getting clarity on, you know, when you see that the decisions are being inconsistently made, it takes a lot of safety for them to recognize it and to want to do something about it. So that's not where I usually lead. I usually go somewhere else where I see that there's a problem that people are complaining about. And, you know, one of the things about, I'm not really hepped up on like everything's about the 8 waste, like, but I mean, waste is important, but I'm not, you know, that's not the focus of the bulk of our work initially. The initial focus is on where does it hurt? You know, I have a healthcare background, so I have a lot of like healthcare metaphors and stuff like that. And where does it hurt internally for people? Where does it hurt leaders? Where does it hurt customers? And usually it's not, I mean, almost always there's some clarity problem that is causing part of the pain. So, you know, people are much more motivated to fix something that they feel is harmful, or, you know, they're having discomfort or stress or whatever. So I go to where I find that I'm going to be able to help people feel better.
Good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good question. What else? What's the worst clarity situation any of you are facing? What's the biggest ambiguity situation you see? You might not want to tell on your companies, though.
Well, Karen, this is Eduardo from
Hi.
And well, I just had a case today, you know, that in a meeting, we were doing some procedures yesterday, review procedures, and I pulled some procedures from, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and one of the leaders told me, no, we are not going to take any old procedure to create this new procedure. And that was yesterday, and today it was a different procedure, and said, oh, but you don't want to change that, Eduardo, because they have been doing that for 5 years, and that is working fine. So we use an old procedure or a new procedure. And sometimes that's those clarity, right? So maybe I just got to a question here. When you mentioned about the dashboard and the private equity firm just took that company and they put it down and
Destroyed it.
destroy it, right? And I live that also. And then suddenly just new this private equity firm, we bring us or bring new people, and at the end we came out with a dashboard pretty similar with the original. But what do you think? What is how we can create that appetite that you mentioned for the leadership?
Well, I actually think leaders often have the appetite, but don't really know how to do it. I think that, I think most leaders know how to measure. I mean, they may not be great at it, but most leaders appreciate the need to measure, and they need, they have goals and things like that. Most leaders, especially when you get to director or above level, are used to that. What they're not used to doing is limiting the number of KPIs to the meaningful ones on a dashboard that everyone has access to. So I spend a fair amount of time trying to convince leaders to don't hide their KPIs. And, there are some customer facing environments where the KPI could be damaging for a customer to know that you're measuring such a thing, because it implies that there is a problem. And in most cases, the KPI does imply that you have a gap that you're trying to close. So there are some sensitivities where I said, well, then take just the one off, and you guys, do it in the boardroom, but have these other ones out there so the employees at all levels can see the connection to where you're trying to go, and be more likely to help in achieving that because they understand where you're actually trying to go. And so I think getting them comfortable with sharing it is the hardest part that I've experienced.
Thank you. And I just want to add, one of the things of the tools we are using for clarity is the Racy Chart. I think something it's kind of complex. Well, it helps a little bit, but there's better tools. But at least
there are better tools.
Yeah.
I am actually not a Racy fan. I grew up with Racy. I started my quality days, back in the 80s, and I grew up with it, and over, people go like, what's the difference between responsibility and accountability? And I do have a Racy-ish thing that we use for when we're making improvements and doing projects that classify whether people need to be intimately involved in the project. Do they need to be a decision maker on the project? Do they need to be informed of the project? Do they need to be trained on it? Like it's definitely looking at all the different possible stakeholders and what their role needs to be and getting super clear about that, but it's not Racy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What was I going to ask you guys? I was going to ask you something. Oh, I know. So do any of you think you're going to take that exercise and try it with some people? The task switching? Yeah. I mean, it's great for teenagers too, by the way. They loved it when I did it with them. And so I think, it's a simple little exercise that really drives the point home that that there's a lot to be done here. I'm going to take a look at the chat. There's a lot coming through. Let me just see if there's any other. A lot of it's like commenting and saying yes, good. Okay, hang on. Let's see. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask while I'm looking here.
Well, maybe you can ask the people that is writing on the chat if they want to do the question directly. Maybe Mohammed Adil, you want to do the question, or he questioned, what tools do you use for root cause analysis in service industry? Well, that's
the same tools you use anywhere else. It's quality is quality, and the root causes of quality problems are, the only thing that's different is a machine, having a machinery problem versus a thinking problem. Your brain's the machine in the service sector, but it's the same classic. So we have a root cause analysis course, and we finally kind of put a stake in the ground on a few things that I didn't write about in any of my books. So for example, a fishbone diagram, there are a lot of naysayers on fishbone diagrams because it's not actually determining the root cause. It's just brainstorming about potential root causes. And I agree with that. It is not an actual root cause analysis tool. It's in that bucket. But what it's really brilliant at doing is getting a lot of people to start thinking about root cause. And, our responsibility is not even, it's beyond just solving the problem. We're trying to teach people how to become better problem solvers. And so, I mean, to get one person to start thinking about root cause all the time, consistently, when the gap appears, like that's a success, a big success. So I like fishbone diagram from a learning and kind of almost a habituating kind of thing. Then you have to, of course, validate when the team says, well, we think these three, and they don't have data. You've got to get some data to validate and all those things. So that one. Cause and effect trees, cause trees, use them a ton with data. Love cause trees. Use them probably 90% of all of the problem solving has a cause tree in it. FMEA, I don't do a whole lot of. I like FMEA more for retrospective and reactive problem solving than like the proactive going after a problem. I think it can be used proactively, but I spend so much time in healthcare, and Joint Commission did this crazy thing where they required everyone to use FMEAs on everything. And I'm like, oh, where's nuance? So that was a very sad day that they required that, and not a fish. I would rather them have required a fishbone diagram or a cause tree. We don't do a lot of ANOVA analyses. We don't run into the need for it. We don't do a lot of we don't do a lot of the big guns kinds of root cause analysis that you need when it's a very vexing problem. And we also don't work in a space where there are like really narrow tolerance limits that you need to get into the nitty gritty of why you're not getting right there. Like, our work is, we do manufacturing, but we do a lot of service sector, and it's not as fine, the need. So cause trees to me are the cat's meow.
Okay, thank you. And then Andres Cisneros, he has a question. Andres, you want to do it yourself? You want to unmute yourself?
It's no problem. And I guess basically what I wanted to ask Karen, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Love the theme about clarity. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if, because maybe some of the times we focus a lot on doing a lot of stuff at the same time, trying to think to ourselves that maybe that's productive in a way, right? But through your presentation, I was wondering if on this subject, if you've seen that maybe there's some private or public companies that you've seen that have an understanding of their clear vision and mission, but unfortunately creates this silo environment work that people think they're collectively producing results for the end mission or goal, but in reality, individual silo contributions, I would think that never helps the bigger collective results trying to get accomplished. I don't know if I'm making myself
Yeah.
clear on that.
Yeah, you are. And that's why I love value stream mapping. I don't like to use mapping for the sake of mapping. In fact, I always say it's not about the map. It's about the mapping process, the process of discovery, the process of changing people's minds from being very siloed thinkers to being holistic thinkers, and seeing how their piece actually connects to the greater good, and all the things that happen from value stream mapping. And so it's, one of the things that happens from a clarity perspective is the truth is, like in your face when you do a really good value stream map. And then you can, of course, design a better future state and that type of thing. But the people, I think it's a real mind bender to go through a really good value stream transformation cycle. And most people can't not think holistically after they've gotten the bug. And the bug can happen pretty quickly when you do that kind of work. And the other thing I'll say about, the holistic versus siloed things, like, we see so much sub-optimization where people work really hard and they get really good results and really good improvement, but it's not connected to the work system. And so it's like, God, it makes me sick, sometimes to see people do such great work and work so hard, but it doesn't really result in any greater value to a customer, any greater speed, any better quality, because it's not connected to the rest of it. So that's why I think value stream work is really important.
I think we have a question from Harshal. Harshal, would you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Can you hear